Hi, this is 50/50, real estate podcast for the common man, where we talk about selling, buying, and investing in real estate. We aren't baffling you with BS. We're dazzling you with brilliance. We're not telling you how to become a millionaire. We're telling you stories, the truth, and the information no one is talking about. So sit back, listen, laugh, and enjoy 50/50, real estate podcast for the common man.
Hey everybody, hope you're doing fine and looking good. Hey, JD here. Welcome to our podcast. We're going to be discussing some interesting things that has to do with investors. You know, every time I listen to YouTube or podcasts, I'm always listening to these big time real estate investors that tell you how easy it is to invest in homes and how they made them millions of dollars in real estate, blah, 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 blah. Which is, you know, great and dandy, but a lot of them are frauds. A lot of them are just big talkers. It's just, I don't know, you have to really look at them and say, why are they doing this? Now, let me give you a little background so you know that I'm legit here. Been selling real estate for 35 years, and usually about 80% of my business were investors. So I dealt with quite a lot of investors, the good, the bad, and the weasels, basically. And I'm going to tell you a little bit on behind the scenes what a lot of these investors that you hear or see or read about, really what they're all about. Well, when I first got into this business, there was just so many late night investors, wannabe get rich quick real estate schemes, and it was just amazing. And when I started looking at the investors, I realized out of about 100 investors, real investors that invest in real estate, maybe 10 of them are really legit. The rest of them are wannabes. They just do everything to try to make a buck. And it's really interesting because when I get together with them, I just have to shake my head because a lot of them are so unethical. And I just, it's kind of like, well, I'll invest in real estate, and if it really doesn't work out, well, at least I gave it a try. And here's the thing that's really interesting. I used to have a boss years ago, and this is before I actually got into real estate. And he owned about 7 properties. And I was like really impressed. I said, wow, 7 properties, that's excellent. That's, how did you do it? And he goes, well, I just kind of bought them and got a good deal on them. And I'm just kind of renting them out. And that was about it. And I said, well, tell me a little bit about, the process. He said, well, it's not as easy, JD, as, they make it out to be. He goes, first of all, you really got to struggle to get decent renters. And usually a lot of them kind of overstate how wonderful they are. And a lot of them have had evictions or bad credit or loss of jobs or so on and so forth. So it's really hard to get good renters in. And then he said renters really don't take care of the properties like you do. They don't really vacuum and clean the yard and, clean the kitchen. He goes, they just kind of, are kind of pigs. And I said, really? He goes, oh, yeah, stains on the carpet. They don't clean the stove. If something breaks, they don't really fix it and they don't tell you about it. And he had a really funny joke that I thought was really funny. He said, how many tenants does it take to fix a light bulb? And I said, gee, I don't know. How many tenants does it take to fit a light bulb? He goes, none. They just call up the landlord to do it. So I kind of laughed at that. And that's kind of really interesting. Well, move on about 3 or 4 or 5 years later on. And I had moved on and we were having lunch and he seemed really, really down. And I'm like, man, you look like the whole world's on your shoulders. He's like, yeah, the market just really went down the tubes and I just couldn't afford those payments on those 7 properties I own. And it was really hard to get renters. And I just let them all go back into foreclosure. And I said, really? Wow. I wouldn't have expected that. He goes, well, it's no big deal. I still own my house and I learned a lot. And, maybe in the future, if things get better, I'll buy some other investment properties. And I learned that. I learned a lot of times people will buy investment properties. And if things don't work out, they just give them back to the bank. And some of the rules say if you have some foreclosures within 3 years, you can buy homes, or within 7 years, you can, it comes off your credit and you can purchase homes again. So if you've had a foreclosure, a lot of times you'll be able to buy a home with 3 to 7 years. So a lot of these investors, if it just doesn't work out and they can't afford it and the homes aren't worth what they paid for and they can't get renter, they just give them back to the bank and figure, well, in 7 to 10 years, nobody will know about my foreclosures and I'll just rebuy them, which is kind of really, really shady. And, that's kind of the underhanded thinking that a lot of real estate investors are. Like I said, 80% of my business were real estate investors. And like I said, I had about 100 real estate investors. Maybe 10 were really legit, really honest, straightforward. All of them, the rest of them were all realer dealers, make money as quick as I can, and if it doesn't work, just move on to some other gig, and so on and so forth. And that's what's really kind of interesting. Here's another one. I had a gentleman that came up, wanted to buy investment property. So I was young. I was probably maybe 2 or 3 years into real estate. And I said, okay, great, let's go for it. And he bought a property, and I said, great. And about a year later, he calls me up, and he wants to buy another property. So I said, great. About 6 months later, he wants to buy another property. So he's buying these properties, and he's doing really well. And I ask him, how are you doing this? I mean, how are you buying all this real estate? I mean, you don't have a great job, and but boy, you're just knocking out of the park. He goes, wow, JD, here's my plan. I buy these properties that are in really bad shape. I fix them up, gain equity, and then I get a home equity mortgage, and then I buy the other one. So I sat back and I went, oh, wait a minute. So you're kind of mortgaged out on all these? And he's like, yeah, I just mortgage them to the hilt and then just use that money to buy the next one. And maybe eventually, years from now, I'll have them paid off and I'll be a multimillionaire. And I said, oh, well, okay. Well, like the first one that bought the 7 properties and went into foreclosure, kind of the same thing happened to him, but he kind of got a different angle. As he went on, he took the home equity lines of credit on his investment properties, took that cash and paid off his home, the one that he actually lived in. And then when the market went south, he actually let the other ones go into foreclosure and let the bank take them. But he was pretty much debt free because he didn't own anything. I mean, he didn't owe anybody anything because he had paid off all his debts in his home with the home equity line of credit on the other homes that he mortgaged to the hilt. And he let all those go into foreclosure when the markets kind of crashed and burned. But that's kind of like your typical investor. The ones you see, the late nighters, the get rich quick YouTubers, and so on and so forth. And I still remember getting another investor, and I was talking to him, and he owned something like 30 properties. And he was trying to convince me, he was a young guy, trying to convince me that he's worth like $10 million, $15 million. And I said, wow, how are you worth this much? He goes, well, I own all these homes and so on and so forth. I said, really? I said, wow, how did you, accumulate so much wealth? And he goes, well, I bought like a house every 6 months to a year. And I said, really, wow, that's phenomenal. And he goes, well, I'm getting some good passive income and just talking it up and so on. But the more deeper and deeper I got into it, the more I realized he's pretty much doing the same thing as the other guy. He just keeps borrowing off his one home to buy his second home, borrowing off his second home to buy the third home. So he wasn't worth $15 million. He was probably in debt, $14 million. And that's what's really funny about these investors. They sit back and they say, I'm worth all this money, and there's no proof. There's absolutely no proof. They're charlatans, and they just kind of the flim-flammers who just basically try to convince you they're multimillionaires, but there's no proof. They don't show you all the homes and what they're worth. They just say, here's the homes I own, and here's the proof that I own them, but they never show you all the mortgages that are on them. And I remember another guy I was dealing with. It was really funny. He owned some properties, and we were driving around and kind of looking at some investment properties and so on and so forth. And there was a homeless guy on the corner. And I said, God, I wonder what his story is. I always like to know the story between homeless people. Did they just get homeless because of their bad decisions, or was it just, wrong place at the wrong time and they got laid off, or something happened, it wasn't really their fault. So as we were driving around, he turned to me, he said, well, JD, I bet you that guy is more wealthier than me. And I said, really? Why would that be? And he said, well, all those homes that I owe, I'm in debt up to my eyeballs, and I bet you that guy owes nobody anything. And, I thought about that. I really thought about that. I said, this guy has a point. I bet you there's a lot of real estate investors that just owe a ton of money, and they never tell you what they owe. They just tell you what they own. And I remember my dad, God rest his soul, we were talking about investing in millionaires and wealthy people and so on and so forth. And he said, JD, let me tell you, it's not what you own, it's who you owe. And he goes, I rather see a guy living in a trailer with no debt. He's more wealthier than the guy that owns all these properties that are debt up to his eyeballs and so on and so forth. And I said, you got a point. And another person that I talked to said, if you didn't have any ethics, you can make money in anything. If you just didn't care one way or another, you can make money in any trade. And I remember this other investor, he finally got arrested and thrown in jail for fraud. There was a lot of them that got busted for fraud, and I'll tell you a couple of stories. Years ago, there used to be a thing called a non-qualifying assumption, which means anybody could buy a home, bad credit, no credit, no job or anything. All they had to do is assume somebody else's a loan. So all it was a non-qualifying assumption. You didn't have to qualify. You came in, gave the seller $500, $1,000 because he was upside down in the home. And he just turned over the deed over to you, and you went on. And actually, the loan wasn't in your name. It was in the seller's name that you assumed the loan for. Well, there was so much fraud. That's why you don't have any non-qualifying assumptions anymore. There was just so many frauds, charlatans, scallywags that came in, assumed every loan they possibly could. I mean, I heard of somebody who had 30, 40 assumable loans and homes. And then what they did is they went out and rented all the homes. Equity skimmed, and what that means is they just never paid the payments, took all that money for rents and stashed it, and then never paid the payments. So they all went into foreclosure, and they didn't go in foreclosure under the guy who assumed the loans. They all went into foreclosure on the person who originated the actual loans. So a lot of these people who just did non-qualifying assumptions, they all had foreclosures on their credit, and the guy who assumed and didn't, because you didn't have to tell people when you assumed their loan that they had liability on it. So there was so many of those guys, and I remember a guy went and finally got caught by the FBI for fraud, 30 years in the slammer because of loan fraud and so on. And there's other people who do that. I know someone who told me that he read about, and there was a true story, that so many people were how did he do it? They were buying homes as investors, and they had mortgage companies, appraisals, and inspectors, and all in on it. So they were all kind of in cahoots with each other. And a lot of back then lenders, they didn't need to be, well, lenders need to be licensed, but loan originators didn't need to be licensed. So you could come off the street and start doing loans. Matter of fact, if you were out of prison, you could do them until they finally, there was so much fraud, they said you had to get licensed, and now FBI and background checks. But back then, you didn't. And even today, I mean, I always tell people background checks and so on and so forth. That doesn't make you honest for the rest of your life. If you're desperate, you're going to do some stupid things. And still today, you get people who are in cahoots with each other, and they have, lending institutions, independent lending brokers that are giving loans, and they just broke out the loans, and the fraudulent loans and fraudulent houses and so on. What they do is they sell these overpriced homes. They get these inspectors who just say, yeah, the home is great. And then they get these lenders who do lenders, and then they pay off the appraisals to do fake appraisals. And then they get the loans, and they stick these buyers, these straw buyers in homes, and then they'll upside down on them. And then by the time they can't afford the home or they're ready to sell and find out that they're so upside down in the home, these guys have closed up shop and moved to a different part of the country, or moved out of the country and so on. And, there's people like that. And like I said, investing in real estate, there's a real shady side to it that they never ever tell you. A lot of talk, a lot of, big talkers and not really any doers. Matter of fact, I remember one instance where I was going by a really, it was probably a $2, $3, $4 million mansion, and there was a guy filming in front of it with a few other guys. I said, geez, I wonder if that's the real estate agent. I'd like to go into it. So I'm talking to one of the agents, and he's really not the agent who has the listing. He's kind of the agent who works with this guy who does these seminars and get rich quick scams. And I said, guy, what are you guys doing? He goes, well, I set up a showing on this home, and it's pretty much, the people are pretty much moved, and they're living somewhere else, and they're just staging this home until they sell it. So what we do is we set up a showing, and the guy rents for a day a Lamborghini or Rolls or whatever. He sticks it in front of the house, and then he records as if he owns the house and says, oh yeah, I made millions of dollars in real estate. Let me walk you through the house, and this is what I own, and so on and so forth. And I just went, are you kidding me? How do you get away with that? He goes, oh yeah, what are people going to do? We're not really, we're not breaking into the house. We're not doing anything. We're just filming a house for sale and empty and so on and so forth. And most likely the owners will never know because they're out of town and they have moved and so on and so forth. And if they do, what are they going to do? Sue us for what? I mean, what's damages? They don't have really any damages or anything like that. And I went, oh, man, what shady people. So then I started, every time I see these guys, on YouTube or late night saying, I'm a multi-millionaire and I made millions of dollars in real estate, and they're sitting in front of an expensive car and a $1 million house, I always remember, yeah, like the guy who filmed in front of a house that was listed and rented a car. It's probably the same scam. So, like I said, there is such a shady part of investing in real estate. I like I said, out of probably 100 investors, 10 of them are legit, and the rest of them are just shady, get rich quick, do whatever I can to make a buck, and if it doesn't work, then I'll just hose somebody and move on, or give them all to the bank and move on, or move to another part of the country and nobody will know me, and I'll just do the thing again. There is some really, really decent investors, and I've worked with them, and I'll tell you about wealthy, multi-million dollar people. Millionaires and wealthy people don't show their wealth. You will never, ever, ever know that they're wealthy. Now, people who are well off will try to flaunt their wealth, and with expensive cars and watches and clothes and so on. I'm not talking about guys that are well off who try to impress you with all that nonsense. I'm talking big bucks, big wealth. You would never ever know. They don't dress in fancy Armani suits. They're just in blue jeans and a shirt, and that's really about it. You would never know. And let me tell you an example. What I learned, and it was a big, huge huge lesson when I started real estate. Me and my friend were having an open house. It was probably the second year in real estate. And it was terrible. I mean, we were just like kicking a ball around in the backyard, just trying to amuse ourselves. And this old beat up Honda car, rusty, probably holding together with duct tape. It was a dog. Drives up, and this little old lady gets out. She's, not really dressed very well, just kind of like, typical kind of older clothes and so on. She's got a little cane, and her daughter is with her, and they come in the open house, and me and my friend, we were young and stupid. We both look at each other, and we go, "Oh, great! We've been here all day for this." And they are looking around the house, and it's like we'll kind of joking. You take them. You take them. No, I don't want them, JD. You take them. You waste your time with them. Well, it comes to find out. My partner says, well, there's nothing else going on in this open house, and we'll waste no time. I'm just going to take him out and show him a few homes, and I'll see you later. So I said, great, good luck. So he leaves, and I don't see him till about 3 weeks later at the office. And, we having lunch, and I said, you know what? Remember that old lady with the old junky car and came into that open house? Whatever happened to her? And he goes, oh, JD, you won't believe this. He said, I didn't believe it too, and I just, dumb luck, boy, I'll tell you, I'm the luckiest guy on earth. I said, why? He goes, she just bought $1 million home, and my face hit the floor. I said, oh, come on. You're pulling my leg. What kind of garbage are you giving me? And he goes, no, JD, she just bought $1 million home. We're going to close in a week. She has $1 million in the bag. As a matter of fact, she has about $3 million in cash in the bank. And I went, are you kidding me? And I thought he was kidding me. And then when he closed, he showed me the closing papers, and I'll be darned, she bought $1 million home. And I went, are you kidding me? So I learned that people who are really extremely wealthy, they don't show it. They don't want you to know. So now fast forward 5 years, and I'm working in a bigger company. I'm doing really well, and I got recruited from a bigger company, and so on and so forth. And I'm doing what they call, what was it? Desk. I think it was called desk or something like that. And it's when people call and they want information on the home. You take the call and you try to sell them and get business that way and get leads that way. So I'm sitting at this desk, and this guy comes in a beat up old gray truck, just must have been 20, 30 years old. He's in overalls, kind of grubby looking, kind of looks like an old farmer guy. Comes into the lobby, and he's like kind of looking around and staring off in space, and nobody's really helping him. Nobody's saying, hey, can I help you? They're just kind of rolling their eyes like, where did this guy come from, and so on and so forth. So I'm looking at him, and I go, oh, wait a minute. The old lady. Remember the old lady years ago who was a multimillionaire who never showed it? Well, this could be my old lady. So I come in, and I get out of the desk, and I walk over to the lobby. I said, hi, I'm JD. How are you doing? He goes, fine. He goes, I really have my eye on this property, and I really like to see it and get more information on it. I said, yeah, come on over to the desk. I'll be glad to talk to you. And I talked to him, and he was a really nice guy, just a super great guy. And he gives me the address, and it's $1.5 million piece of property with this huge lot. I mean, it's kind of like a big house on this farm lot. And I tell him the price, and he goes, "Oh, okay, no problem." And I'm like, "Okay, let's go out and look at it." And we look at it, and he really likes it. He says, "I'd like to put a contract down." And I said, "Okay, great." And I said, "Well, do you have a mortgage company I can talk to?" He goes, "No, it'll be cash." And I'm like, "Okay." And I said, "Well, do you have a bank that I can call up and get a proof of funds?" And he said, "Yeah." He gives me his bank number. And back then, it was okay to call him as long as you got the okay. And so I call him and I said, "I've got Mr. Blah 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 in front of me, and he wants to put an offer on it, house, and just want to verify that he has the funds to pay cash." So I give the phone to him so they can verify that he's the guy he's talking to. Then they hand the phone to me, and he goes, "Oh yeah, don't worry. What's the price of the home?" And I said, "I think it's about $1.5 million." And he goes, "Oh, that guy can buy anything. Don't worry about it. He's got plenty of money in the bank." So we definitely closed on that, and I got the biggest commission in my life that I ever got. And like I said, I wasn't surprised because, like I said, if you ever come across people, you don't know if they're millionaires or not. And millionaires, very, very wealthy people, they don't want you to know that they're wealthy, and so on and so forth. Tell you kind of maybe show up to their house and they live in a huge mansion. You go, "Holy smokes, is this where they live?" I would have never thought of that. A lot of them, they just don't show it. So, like I said, there's a lot of these wannabe charlatan investors who want you to believe everything and come to their seminars and buy their videos, or try to persuade you they're multimillionaires on YouTube and podcasts, and in reality, they're in debt up to their eyeballs. As a matter of fact, just to kind of wrap this up, there used to be a commercial where there's this beautiful, beautiful home, and there's a big, huge boat and all these expensive cars in front of it, and the camera circles around. There's this huge swimming pool, beautiful home, and the guy's cleaning out his swimming pool, and they go, "Boy, you have a beautiful home, and look at all those fancy cars and boats and so on. How do you do this?" And he goes, "Hey, I'm in debt up to my eyeballs." And that's usually a lot of wannabe investors and so on and so forth. So if you're thinking about investing, don't do it. Not right now. It's the worst time to invest. The market's going to crash and burn. Interest rates have almost doubled. They're like 6.25%, and they were like 2.93%. Builders are going to be hosed. I see it now. There's people walking away from their houses that they've been waiting a year to be built, and they're still not built. Now they owe, now that it's almost $600, $700 more a month on their payment, and they can't afford it. Plus, the houses aren't selling, overinflated prices. So they think, "Hey, I'm going to sell my home for $700,000, and now nobody is buying them, and they don't have all these buyers now." And it's like, "Well, you might be able to get $600,000. It's like, "Oh, I was expecting to get $100,000 more. Well, I was going to apply that to my other home, and now I can't buy them." And these builders are going to be left holding a ton of inventory. There's going to be a lot of people who, bought investment properties, we're going to rent them out for a year or two and then sell and make a profit. They're going to be upside down. It's just going to be really ugly in the next year or two. So if you're thinking about buying investment properties, don't buy any investment. If you have investment properties, sell them as quick as you can, or you're going to be buried in them for the rest of your life until the interest rates go lower, and they're not. This is like 1 in a million chance that the interest rates will ever come down to where they were the past year or two. And if you're thinking of capital gains, I'm going to pay 20-25% capital gains tax. Sell and pay the capital gains tax, because within a year your property could go 20, 30, 40, 50% down, and you're going to lose way more than what you paid in capital gains tax. But you know what? It's your properties, it's your life. You can do whatever you want to. But guys, I'm giving you advice. If you own real estate, sell, get rid of them, or you're going to take a bath in the next year or two. And like I said, if capital gains is preventing you from selling them, just pay the capital gains tax, because if things go south, which they are, you're going to lose way more than the amount that you would have paid in capital gains. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it gave you some insight. Have a great day, and I'll see you next week. Take it easy. Bye for now.
We hope you enjoyed the show, Real Estate for the Common Man. Please follow us or subscribe. Tell your friends, neighbors, relatives, and coworkers about us. We're on all your major podcast apps: Amazon, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and iTunes. If you can't remember all that, just Google it, or have your friends Google Real Estate for the Common Man, and it will come up. Again, we thank you very much for your time, and hopefully you enjoyed the show. Hey, if you live in Colorado Springs and want to buy or sell a home, you can look us up at soldrealestatecompany.com, as in I sold a home. Again, thank you very much. Have a very good week, and we'll see you next Monday. Bye for now.